afternoon, friends. Greetings, peace be with you. My name is Reverend Dawn Bennett. I am the pastor at the table in Nashville, Tennessee. We want to thank you for joining us for Pride. Happy Pride. Today we are gathering throughout the Southeastern Synod. We've got some fabulous friends joining us today who have graciously given of their time and their talent and their wisdom to share with you some important information that we have come together to just kind of get to know each other and to help folks glean wisdom and understanding about what it is to be a person of faith and a person who is a member of the LGBTQ community in our synod. So without further ado, it's going to be a quick hour. We invite you to ask any questions that you may have, put those in the chat, and we will get to those as we have time. Today we have 4 wonderful folks who are visiting with us, and I'm going to introduce them just briefly, and then we will commence with our panel. So our first panelist is Maryam Abdullah. Maryam's passion rests in helping, encouraging, and empowering individuals. Her life's mantra comes from the words of Oprah Winfrey, "When we know better, we do better." As a therapist, her goal is to share the tools and the resources needed to change your life for the better. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in Criminal Justice and a Master of Social Work from Tennessee State University. Maryam is a licensed master clinician with 19 years of experience, advocacy, and leadership in the field of social work. Her core practice includes a focus on individuals, couples, and families utilizing dialectical behavior, solution-focused, and trauma-informed therapies. She is the founder and CEO of I Am Well Consulting, LLC, which provides emotional well-being support to professionals. Outside of her work as a therapist, she is a child of the Most High, a wife to her beautiful partner, and a mother of an amazing toddler. Welcome, Maryam. We are so glad to have you with us this afternoon. Our second guest this afternoon is Lisa Medford. Lisa's pronouns are she and her. She is a 4th-year student at Georgia Tech. She's a member of the Pride Alliance. She's the president of LGBTQIA student organization at Georgia Tech. She's an advocate for gender inclusive housing and LGBTQIA inclusion. And Lisa is a member of Redeemer Lutheran Church in Georgia. So welcome, Lisa. We're glad to have you along with us this afternoon. Our third panelist is Gerette deBord. I apologize, Gerette. Gerette is a licensed professional counselor and a licensed alcohol and drug counselor located in my hometown, Nashville, Tennessee. Gerette has almost a decade's worth of experience working in the mental health and addiction field, both in inpatient treatment and outpatient community mental health. Last August, Gerette started private practice focusing on substance use and trauma, as well as life transitions, specifically with the LGBTQIA+ community. Gerette's originally from a small town in East Tennessee and has been living in Nashville for about 6 years now. Welcome, Gerette. We're so glad to have you joining us this afternoon. And last but certainly not least, our 4th panelist is Reverend Noah Herren. Noah is the current pastor at St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Atlanta, Georgia, and a graduate of Candler School of Theology in the University of Alabama. He is committed to spiritual development outside the church walls and has served in multiple non-traditional ministry roles as a teacher of theology in a women's prison, a hospital and a prison chaplain, and a guitar player at bar churches. Noah attributes his passion for ministry and spirituality to his own journey of reconciling multiple theologies and his experience as a transgender man raised in the Deep South. Welcome, Noah. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Friends, we are beyond excited to have these guests with us this afternoon. As you imagine, we are going to have some wonderful, wonderful stories that we're going to hear. So without further ado, we are going to hear from Maryam first. And Maryam, we're hoping that you will share as much as you are comfortable sharing about your origin story, your growing up and your coming out.
Thank you for that, Pastor Dawn, for those introductions, and hello and good afternoon to everyone. And so with that question, of course, as you said, it brings a lot of things that we don't have time to get all the way into, but definitely I would just start off by sharing that I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up, I was born into a two-parent household initially. Until about the age of 5, I grew up in a Muslim household. Um, Years later, my parents divorced, and so then I was raised in a Christian household with my mother and my siblings. And through my growing up, I was always taught, the value of love and respect for each other. And I think a lot of that came from, again, my father being Muslim, my mother being Christian, and deciding that they love each other, they come from different backgrounds, that those two things can go together. And the most important thing is love. And so I am grateful for having that foundation. Me coming out turned into more of just not knowing or having anyone to relate to. I grew up in the South. I'm originally from West Tennessee, a small town like Gerette. I'm from a small town. And so there were no, I shouldn't say that there were other, I'm sure LGBTQ people in the community. I was not aware of them in the 80s. I don't even know that LGBTQ was a acronym at that time. And so I just wasn't able to relate and know what those feelings were that I was having at that young age. And so I just did what was, quote, normal. I dated men or young men in high school and then into college. But into college, of course, I was able to move and go to college in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I just was able to broaden my horizons, diversify, be able to learn from other people about the things that were going on with me. And then I was able to comfortably identify that and to come out. And luckily, or blessed, I think it was a blessing that I was able to come out to a family who were open and have always been open, and again, loving and supportive of different ideas of what you want to do, in our family. And so that was always good for me. So yeah, my coming out story wasn't horrible. It wasn't, bad. It was just the lack of resources in helping me when I was younger to really identify some of those things. So yeah, I would say that's a quick version of my background in coming out.
Thank you, Maryam. I think it's interesting to note that, in a 1-hour seminar, we are not going to hear all of the ins and outs of our coming out story. There's just so much to tell, but thank you. Thank you for those highlights. Lisa, would you join us? And again, for you also share your origin story, your growing up and your coming out as much as you're comfortable sharing.
Yes, and I'm really grateful to be here and be able to share my own story and kind of listen and learn from others. I think a lot of the words I'll give today may differ a little bit from the other stories, just because I got to grow up in Decatur, inside the perimeter, within the last 2 decades. So I think a lot of my maybe living in life and my coming out story may be a little bit different. I've just beyond grateful to have lived in communities and neighborhoods within schools where I had examples of varied and beautiful versions of love all over me, whether that is, within my own neighborhood, we have pride festivals and our swim meets are pride themed. And my schools are welcoming to the kind of activism that I bring forth and prioritize. And that is the case for so few people. And that is a new version of growing up for the LGBTQI community. And so I am just grateful to have lived a life where loving was just part of it. And me figuring out what the gender identity of those individuals wasn't any more than just the experience itself of growing up in communities that were based upon love. So that may be the short version, but one I'm really grateful for adults along the way and peers right beside me that allowed me to just be who I was.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you. Gerette, would you honor us with your story of your origin story of coming out, growing up, what you're comfortable with sharing?
Yeah, I just want to start off again. Thank you for this opportunity, and grateful to be here. I grew up in a small town like Maryam, but on the other side of the state, East Tennessee. I grew up in the Church of Christ. And I think for me is something that when I was trying to figure out how to sum this up is, especially when I was younger, I didn't have representation or even language for what I was feeling. So there's a lot of confusion, I guess. And then whenever I started to connect the dots, what I realized was I was one of those things that people were talking about was going to hell. So I remember when I was 16, I came out to my best friend. And then I was able to come out a little bit. And then when I got into college, I went to a Christian university in West Tennessee, and I went right back in. And so in all my efforts to become a good Christian boy who marries a woman, it didn't turn out that way, obviously, but it actually, even by my best efforts of going through that to that university, I just was able to discover and open up knowledge about really more acceptance of myself and who I was, in spite of my efforts, I guess, at first. So I, like I said, start looking at other forms of Christianity, the Episcopal Church, and eventually I left altogether. I've been practicing Buddhism for about 6 years now, but still reconciling, having to reconcile my past, right? So, yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you for that beautiful story. Pastor Noah, we invite you to come forward and share with us your coming out story, your growing up years, what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks again. Like everyone's named, I feel very honored to be amongst this company and to be a part of this. Yeah, so I would parts of my story echo other people's, but I was born in a small town about 45 minutes outside of Birmingham, Alabama, and as it noted in my bio, I'm transgender, so I was born female and I now identify as male. But yeah, what Maryam was saying about being in the South in the 80s and it just wasn't a thing, just being queer, any kind of queerness was not something that was talked about. I'm sure it happened, but it was not visible in our culture. And so I had that experience. And then like Gerette, I tell people I was born theologically confused because my dad's side of the family is Church of Christ, and my mom's side of the family was Lutheran, Missouri Synod. And so I was the firstborn child, and so they decided that they couldn't make their theologies work, so we just started going to a Methodist church. And then it was just like, whatever. So I've spent my life wrangling with my theology and my identity and all of these things. And one of the things I like to say too is, like, we heal in community, and I've had to get all the way through ordination in a Christian denomination to really work through a lot of the healing that I needed to go through from a lot of that kind of childhood. I guess kind of the balance of the secrecy, it being under, the radar and never talked about. And also some of that messaging that Gerette was talking about, just very aggressively, like, no, God doesn't like that. You're going to go to hell, which is, I do not subscribe to that anymore. Not even a little bit. But yeah, there's not enough time for me to tell my whole story, but I did get married to a man, had a couple of kids, came out as lesbian in my early 30s. And then when I was in seminary, discerned, and through therapy and a lot of other things, that it wasn't just a question of sexual orientation. There was some gender identity stuff there too. So transitioned in my mid 30s, and so here I am now. But yeah, that's me in a tiny little nutshell.
Thank you, Pastor Noah. Thank you so much. Friends, we are honored by your stories. To that end, we're going to attempt, I have to say attempt, because we all know this is a nutshell conversation, and this question will become glaringly obvious in your answers. So the next opportunity that you have to bless us with your wisdom, we would like for you to describe your journey of faith as it relates to your sexuality and your gender. And I just want to remind folks that are listening that these conversations are always far longer and far more intimately entangled than we are really able to convey into language. But our panelists are going to do the best they can. So Maryam, would you describe your journey of faith as it relates to your sexuality and gender?
Yes, thank you again for that question. And I have thought about this question and tried to make it as concise as possible. So I'll just start with, currently I am a Christian. I did grow up attending a Baptist church throughout my childhood. When I came to college, I started attending a Disciples of Christ church, and that's what I currently attend now. But throughout that time, again, growing up, of course, it really wasn't talked about, and I was not able to identify anything during my teenage years. But when I became a young woman in college in my 20s, I did begin to, question that because of the things that had been taught to me in church. And so, of course, like Gerette said, that you would go to hell if you were doing these things. It was not godly. And so I did always hold that and think about that and still try to live my life as respectful as I thought I was living for, my higher being. And so I think when I finally was able to reconcile that with much talk, with friends in the community, friends outside of the community, my family, my church family, and it was hard. At one time, the church kind of was divided in, that support of the LGBTQ community, at which time I left, that particular church, because they were not in full support of the LGBTQ community. And so I still went back and forth in my 20s. Should I live this way? Should I not? But finally, again, I think I said at some point, it has to be more about what feels good to me and what is the relationship between me and my God or my higher being or whatever my purpose is. And in doing that, getting a deeper connection with him, she, they, I was able to then say, this is okay. This feels good to me. This feels, I have a connection and I know what that connection is. I am being a good human. And I think that is the best thing to do, and nothing else matters. And so I was able to then start living my life as such, in the church, as well as, in my personal life. And not have to try to tiptoe around to make others comfortable, because I did that a lot at work, at church, in social settings, to not make other people uncomfortable. But again, I had to start telling myself, there's nothing uncomfortable about me. If it is, let me know. But just me being who I am and loving how I love and, having my family, that's not an option. I respect you just as I need that respect back. And so I think it was just a deeper connection with my higher being, studying, reading the word, and understanding everything from the word. I didn't get anything from the word when I studied it on my own that made me feel the way that a lot of society and church have made me feel in the past. And so my reconciliation came through a deeper relationship, deeper growth with my God. So.
Thank you, Maryam. Friends, if you are listening, something that Maryam said, I just want to reiterate, which is to say that you, whatever your faith tradition is and whatever your holy sacred text is that you read, it is really important that you read it for yourself with your own eyes and allow discernment to come through your own mind and in your own spirit, because things will be revealed to you that may or may not be in unison with the things that you are told by people in society. So please listen there. So Lisa, would you describe for us your journey of faith as it relates to your sexuality and your gender?
Yes, I'll try to not make this kind of just a jumble of statements. But I'll start off by saying both my parents have grown up and worked in a faith community their whole lives. My father at Columbia Theological Seminary and my mom at Redeemer for quite a long time. And so, I grew up in a family that went to the early church service on Sunday and began meals with prayer, and we were expected to practice empathy and recognize our privilege and do good always because it's what you're supposed to do. And so oftentimes me loving whoever I wanted to love didn't necessarily create any strife or rift growing up in regards to my own faith. It often just made it stronger when I recognized that, you love boldly, whoever that may be. I think sometimes and sometimes when there was qualms or there were mentions from extended family about how I loved, or maybe just my overall frustration with a larger evangelical church in America in the last decade. But it always often came just back to trust in my own relationship with God, as in I knew, when I got rhetoric or language that said, you can't love that way, that is not how God would want that, that is not okay, I know my relationship with God quite well, and when that is strong and that is there, and I know that's part of who I am, and nothing at a certain point, and nothing really gets between that or can even challenge it in a way that changes my own thought process. So I'm just grateful for that. And thankful for a faith community and parents that instilled also just a trust in myself, where you know who you are, and that's that. So yeah.
Thank you. You know who you are. I think our a great takeaway from Lisa's contribution is to love boldly. Very, very well. Let's see, Gerette, would you, same question for you, describe your journey of faith as it relates to your sexuality and gender?
Yeah, I've always been, even when I was a kid, someone who asked questions. There's always why this, So I think for me, also being a very spiritual person, being able to kind of to echo, I think what both Maryam and Lisa were saying is that relationship between me and my higher power, and rather myself, knowing it's, going from a place, hearing where you're not accepted, this is behavior is wrong, to really seeking safety. For me, spirituality and my connection with my higher power is really a refuge, a safe place for me to ask questions, to reaffirm who I am as a person, and to ground myself in that truth. So, yeah, I encourage everyone I work with, question everything. So.
Question everything. That's a really good takeaway. Something that sometimes gets by us, right? Because we have a tendency as receivers of spiritual care and wisdom from faith leaders in our respective tradition, we have a tendency to just kind of come up under the things that they say to us, and we take them on as our own. But the invitation to question everything is a really important one, because it allows us as individuals to figure out what we do and do not subscribe to, and it helps us to carve our own path forward. So thank you so much for that, Gerette. Pastor Noah, describe for us your faith journey as it relates to your sexuality and gender, if you please.
Yeah. So yeah, similarly, I think when I was younger, when I was a toddler, I knew exactly who I was. And I've always had a strong connection and relationship with God or spirit or the universe, or however you want to term it. And so I'm kind of getting a visual, like there's an anchoring in that, and there has been, but like I buried that for a long time because I couldn't find a space in society. And that's something as a trans person that I think I bump up against a lot, and I find a lot, is that, we are actively creating the spaces that are welcoming to us now. And I think I finally figured that out, but it's taken me a long time to figure out that that's what's been happening all along, is that if I just trust who I am and what I know to be true, and that relationship with God, just like everybody else was saying, then everything else seems to follow. And so that's probably kind of the easiest way to describe my path, because we don't have enough time for all that. But I do want to kind of point out one thing that I've noted in this conversation, just kind of from a theological lens, is that we have something that's called, or we have like the fourfold approach to our faith. And usually it's tradition. This is a Wesleyan model. This is a Methodist model, but it's tradition, reason, scripture, and experience. So we've talked about sacred texts and scriptures and how that, those speak to us, right? We've talked about reason, like Gerette was saying, question everything. We've talked about tradition. Lisa was talking about the traditions in the church that she grew up in and how those fostered this sense of strong self-awareness. But the one that's really perking up and that has really not been present in the church is experience, is trusting our own experience and trusting the experiences of other people, and like really listening to their stories and believing what other people say that their experience with God has been. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight that I noticed that experience really shining through everybody's comments. And it was pretty beautiful to see that freedom there.
Thank you, Pastor Noah. One of the things that occurs to me after hearing you say, trust that experience, I know as a bisexual person, when I tell somebody about my sexual orientation, they always say, "Are you sure?" I'm pretty sure. It's my life. I'm pretty sure, right? And so trusting somebody when they tell you something intimate or something important about them or their expression or the ways in which they live and move and have their being, to trust that experience and trust that willingness to tell that very personal detail about somebody and to just believe it and to honor it. Very, very, very good advice. Thank you, friends. We have one more question, and I would just invite, if you are here as an attendee and you have questions for our panelists, please drop those in the chat. You can send them directly in. I will monitor the chat. You can also send them privately to me, and I will ask them on your behalf, confidentially speaking. So for the four of you, the third and final question is to name your primary concern with the wider church or faith experience that you practice, and especially if you are tied to the ELCA in some way. So name your primary concern with the wider church and where you see the most critical need for advocacy and reconciliation. Maryam, would you lead that portion of the discussion?
Yes. So what I see as one of the biggest concerns, I would say, in the church that not only the church that I attend, but just in my culture. And so as a Black female lesbian, and so as a Black woman in the Black church community, there has always been and still is, unfortunately, a lot of negativity and just negative things around the LGBTQ community related to church. And so what that means is a lot of times I can be friends with you, I can talk to you, I can have a relationship with you, out here, but then in the church, no, you can't do this, and you can't serve this way, or you can't be on this committee, or you can't work with the children, or whatever, because of your thoughts or your beliefs around the LGBTQ community. And so specifically, again, I can speak to the Black community in saying that you have to be, again, if you're saying that you serve a God, a higher power, that is this dynamic, he, she, they are big enough to contain all the things that come with it, even if you don't understand them. And so being more open to and including the LGBTQ community in the ministry, in the pulpit, quote, the Southern pulpit, in the, again, being a part of the church, not just saying, yes, you can come sit in the pew and pay tithes. No, they can be a part, they can lead ministries just the same. And it doesn't have to do with just LGBTQ stuff, because that's another thing. Sometimes you're just asked to do something as a LGBTQ member, but we bring all type of talents, gifts, and skills to the ministry. And so, yeah, just being open to that, being a church that stands on what you say you are. If you say you are a church that is governed by God and ran by his most important, ask, and to me, again, that is to love. And so if you are doing that, being more open to including, and not only including, but letting people be a part of and making them feel that they are worthy and they are validated in that space. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Maryam. Lisa, where is your greatest concern with the challenges that are faced in the faith communities, and your opinion about the most critical need at this time?
Yeah, this will also try to limit the scatter in the response to this answer as well. I think firstly, I actually am drawn back to a statement you made earlier about trust in our experience. I find that often putting members of the LGBTQI community within leadership positions in church is really important, specifically because there's often maybe a heightened awareness of how to build inclusive spaces, whether that's your youth group that has 50 kids under the age of 20, and trust me, a lot of those kids identify as queer. And so recognizing and trusting the experience of your members who will be in charge of building community spaces, who probably do have the experience and the knowledge from their own lives and livelihood on how to create a better inclusive environment. So thinking on that and allowing opportunities for people within our community to lead, I think is imperative. One thing I'm grateful for my own church in Atlanta is we have a campus ministry that is at Georgia Tech, which is partly why I'm on this call today, as I'm currently an intern for the campus ministry that Redeemer Lutheran Church supports at Georgia Tech. And that's been a huge deal for me, because when we also talk about, how creating a next generation that even wants a relationship with God and feels accepted, starting that, creating those spaces in a college environment where it's really not based upon scripture alone or theology alone, but how, with God in mind, are we going to create spaces of love and welcome and advocacy for a younger generation? So also reaching out and meeting young people where they're at, which is wanting to live and grow in a Christian community that is progressive and inclusive in many forms. And so recognizing the need for proactive kind of support of the community, and then also a recognition that before the generation that is my own, there have been years and generations of trauma that have occurred because of the church. And that needs to be recognized and stated and apologized for in many cases. So those are maybe possibly a few qualms that I have. So, but
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's just being part of the LGBTQ community and a person of faith active in your faith tradition. Qualms is a really good word, because I don't think it's possible to have none. And it's an interesting journey for sure. Gerette, would you just kind of inform us of where you see the greatest struggle and the most need at this time?
Yeah, I feel like I'm echoing what has been said on some level too, but representation, if I can see it, I can be it. So having people that are, as Maryam said, a part of, in the pulpit, taking part, leading classes, even in the advertisements, public relations, seeing people like us, to know that it's possible, right? That it's not a foregone conclusion that this can't happen. Also, I think, questioning again, I guess the systems in the past that through which theology has been viewed, to help address that trauma, and then being open to what is not known, having that humility to question, to educate oneself, and just education. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. For as much work has been done, it does seem sometimes that education is in short supply. It isn't in short supply, but I do think it might be short in circulation, and perhaps that's where we could work a little bit more studiously. Pastor Noah, what from your lens, where are our deepest challenges and most needed areas of work?
Yeah, I can think of a handful. So yeah, I'm thinking back specifically to the shared experience of Maryam and Gerette, of myself, of all hearing that, if you live this life, you will go to hell. That is not a message of the past. That message is still out there, and there are people who are still hearing that in Christian communities. And so it drives me crazy that I can't create a perfectly safe, inclusive space. I want to attend to every detail, but what I have to remind myself of is that the space that we've created at our church and in our denomination and in our synod is safer than a lot of what people have experienced. And so, yeah, I think just being aware of the deep trauma, particularly in our area of the country. I mean, it's everywhere, but you know, we're the Bible Belt. And so just being aware of it. And I think this is kind of speaking to my, you know, to something I said before when I was growing up. There's this kind of this repression or this kind of assumption that everybody believes the same thing and acts the same ways and all that kind of stuff. And so I think sometimes communities are like, well, how can we get gay people to come here? How can we get bi people to come here? How can we get, well, guess what? They're already there, you know, and they're already there. And if they're not saying that they're there, then you're not creating a safe enough space. You're not creating an inclusive enough community. And so I think, yeah, I could probably start preaching on this. So I think I'll probably stop there, but those are my main concerns. Well, okay, I'll say one more thing. And just, I think the other thing is just being aware that, that I think there are so many opportunities for community these days. There are so many opportunities for good community, for healing community, for being with people who will love you and support you and care for you. And so if we're the church, what are we doing if we are not that? Because people can go anywhere else. And I don't know that there's really much reason else for us to exist than to make people know that they are loved and know that they are cared and feel that, really tangibly feel that in a community. And if we're not, then we don't have any business being here. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Noah. You know, I recently found myself in conversation with a person who, so at the table, I deal with a lot with high-level trauma situations, religious trauma particularly, around this particular topic of being LGBTQ plus and being Christian simultaneously, as if it is not allowed and not a thing. And so I constantly am finding myself refuting that truth. It is allowed and it is a thing, and you are holy and beloved just as you are, and you were created to be that way. So I think it's important to kind of lift these truths up. And you're right, the conversation when you said if the church is not that, what is it? I found myself recently having a conversation with some young people who said, well, we don't know that our lives are clean enough to come to a church. You know, we've got some cleaning up to do, is what they said. And I said, oh, no. I said, have you not heard? The church is a hospital full of hurting, sick people. That's why we're all coming there, right? There's no such thing as getting yourself cleaned up to come before your maker. You just come as you are. And if you are in an affirming place, then it will be made evident to you that you're in the right spot. But churches are hospitals. And so come as you are and hopefully get the healing that you seek. So we jumped right on in at the beginning of the hour. We jumped on into this discussion and we jumped on into your bios. And so now I kind of want to lift up out of your context, your professional context now. And so Pastor Noah, you'll be invited to kind of give some feedback from your context as a pastor, and Maryam and Gerette, you'll be speaking as mental health professionals. And Lisa, you are going to speak to us as a person who is intimately acquainted with the college community, right? Because that is a lens that not all of us, after we've matriculated through college, sometimes we get it in our heads that we know what's going on. But the reality is, if you're not in it on the daily, there is information that's missing, right? And so I invite you to speak in this context as you have awareness. And so not to end on a down note, friends, but the reality is very difficult in this region of the country to be LGBTQ, period. Christian, another tradition, a young person, an older person, it is difficult because religion is cultural here. And so I want to talk about your information, your application, your wisdom, discernment, and some bright spots that potentially you may have where we could discuss the difficult topic of suicide and suicide ideation, because it is prevalent in our community, and the rates of attempt and the rates of completion for young LGBTQ folks is astronomically high. And but that is not to be said that older persons do not struggle. I deal with many folks who are senior citizens who are still in the closet because the world has not been made to be a safe place for them in nursing homes and otherwise. So Maryam and Gerette, I'm going to invite you to come back to back simultaneously because you're both mental health professionals, and I would like to buttress your conversation so that we can kind of get it all in one nutshell. So Maryam, could you speak to us about your experience as it relates to suicidality?
So that question, or that, not even a question, that stat, yes. When I hear those stats and I know them very well, it is very disheartening to me. Because again, I was once there, and then knowing now that we still, as Pastor Noah said, some of those negative thoughts or beliefs are still being taught. It's disheartening, and that's where a lot of the young people are getting it from. If they're attending church or a family or a community that is saying that, then they have no one to go to. So what we do, even as adults, so internally we just say, then I'm just better off not being here. That's the only thing that I can come up with, is that I'm better off not being here. That will take everything away. That makes it better. That's what I constantly hear from clients who have suicidal ideations, and for those who have attempted, as well as self-harm. We have a lot of young people who self-harm just to get a release. And they say that is the only way to get a release, is to harm themselves. And again, that is very disheartening that is all they have. And they're in a community where it should be total opposite. They should be being loved by a community that calls themselves, whatever, Christians, God believing, whatever. You should be loving people just where they are. And that's the end of it. It's nothing else. Love them where they are. And they wouldn't then turn into, again, clients that I see in their young adult years still struggling. And as Pastor Don just said, then into older adults who are still struggling. So that means you lived a whole life unfulfilled, not authentic, because of a whole group of people and a belief that just should not be. And so, yeah, as a mental health therapist, I would say, if you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, friends, just start asking them, how are they feeling? And truly asking and listening, and just listening, not trying to tell them what to do or how to do this, just listening to how they feel about whatever is going on with them, and sitting and being okay and open to that. That's one thing that you could do as community members to help the young people. They just want to get it out. They don't need you to fix it or tell them that it's right, wrong, or whatever. Just be there to listen to it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Maryam. Thank you. Gerette, what can you add to that wisdom?
I'm sitting here listening and just thinking about how we as humans are hardwired for connection. And so, I've been having several younger LGBTQI people come into my office, and this wanting to identify with others, have relationships with others, have friends. And so I think I want to couple the suicidality rates with addiction rates in the queer community and how they are higher, right? And so the suicidality and addiction, I really believe the opposite of addiction is connection. So being able to have that connection where I'm safe, I'm loved, I'm seen and heard and validated, right? So I feel like the option of suicide is oftentimes seen as the only way to find relief. right? This anxiety from loneliness. So I cannot stress enough, I think, just echoing what has been said, just walking beside a person in love, in understanding as best as one can, connection, relationship. I think those speak to healing a lot of those issues.
Thank you, Gerette. Lisa, I'm going to flip to you so that we can glean your wisdom as a young adult person who has much to say from the inside of the fishbowl. So please.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback a little bit off of you, Gerette, in regards to connection. I think one thing we haven't noted too much yet this hour is the impact of COVID on the LGBTQI community, and then specifically the college set of individuals. Because a lot of what my role as kind of president of the Pride Alliance at Georgia Tech in the last year has been really being at the forefront of witnessing extreme increases of food insecurity and housing needs within the last year. And just thinking on, what this year and a half of loss of connection, of possibly having to relocate back home to unwelcoming families after, oh, we made it to Midtown, we're in Georgia Tech, we're in a kind of inclusive little bubble. But when March happened, we had a lot of, students I'm kind of watching over and taking care of have to go back home to places that possibly were not safe. So just also kind of awareness of that. We've made immense progress, social progress in the last few decades in regards to LGBTQIA inclusion, but even in the last 2 years, we're kind of entering at the college level, specifically a mental health crisis that we haven't seen quite before in regards to an increase of specific needs in relation to COVID. So just want to kind of bring that up as something that is happening at the college level, and is why my kind of main priority specifically within this year at Georgia Tech focuses on gender inclusive housing and the creation of our first LGBTQI emergency fund, which is a direct result of kind of the year and increased need after COVID-19. So
Wow, thank you.
A little bit of wisdom.
You see, friends, this is why we have such a diverse panel, because the wisdom comes from every side, and we cannot possibly know everything that there is to know. And that's another reason why it is critically important for us to collaborate together, right? So that we can be part of a beloved community that really is equipped to care for one another. Pastor Noah, would you please kind of give for us, as from your lens as a pastor, where do you see suicidality imposing itself on your work, and are there any bright spots, and if so, how can we get there?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just as someone who does pastoral care, chaplaining, and queer people tend to find me, it's hard to find someone who is connected with a religious community or connected to some sort of faith tradition who also identifies as LGBTQIA+, who hasn't at least contemplated suicide at some point in time. It's a deep reality. It's a deep truth. We live in a world that does not make it easy for people to reconcile their faith and their identity, sexual or gender. Fortunately, it seems like things are getting better. I don't know. It's like more, but once again, I'm in Atlanta, like Lisa was saying, we are in a bubble. And people come here as a safe haven from all sorts of places. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of need. There's a lot of healing work that needs to be done. And I think that the more that we can just get clear on what's important and what's in front of us and who's right in front of us, and that person is a living being, child of God, you know, then you know, I mean, I am not the mental health professional here, but it seems to me that people become suicidal when they don't see other options. They don't see any hope. All hope is gone. And so, you know, somebody's got to hold that hope, and communities can do that together, and faith communities say that we do. So we should.
Thank you very much. Friends, we have not received any questions in the Q&A, and that is perfectly okay. The reality is that we have recorded this webinar, and it will be kept on the Southeastern Synod's website, and I'm sure that it will be posted in a couple different places on the mental health page for absolute certain. There are some resources if you're joining as an attendee. There are some resources in the chat, some websites there that you can glean some wisdom from. Right now, we are going to take closing, just kind of some closing thoughts from each of our panelists as I say thank you so much for your time and your wisdom here today. We thank all of our attendees. We especially thank Pastor Jonathan Trapp for his studious tech support with which has made all of this possible. We thank Bishop Kevin Strickland for putting the thought for Pride Weekend in the roles of the Southeastern Synod of the ELCA. So we're very grateful to serve under a bishop who gets it, who lives it, who understands it, and who values the information. Closing thoughts, Maryam.
Closing thoughts, I would just say, as a person who identifies as LGBTQ, as well as people who are allies, as well as people who are trying to figure it out, just stay open, continue to educate yourselves, and then continue being, just being a good human. That's all.
Thank you, Maryam. Lisa, your closing thoughts.
Yep, my main closing thoughts are happy June to all those who are within the community, and continue to love who you love and be who you are, and we'll end up all right.
Thank you. Thank you. Gerette, your closing thoughts?
I just want to say the little gay boy from East Tennessee in me is just excited that a talk like this, something like this is going on. I'm just so grateful and thankful to be a part of it. And again, just asking people to stay open and willing and humble.
Thank you. Thank you. Pastor Noah, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking back to a comment you made, Pastor Dawn. You said that, you know, these kids who said that they don't feel good enough to be in church. They don't feel clean enough to be in church. I had that same thought when I was called into the ministry. And, you know, just Maryam said this earlier, but God is bigger. Our higher power is bigger. The possibilities are greater than we could ever imagine. So don't close those possibilities down on yourself. Don't close those possibilities down on other people, and just, yeah. And love boldly. I'm just stealing everybody else's stuff. So anyway.
Thank you so much. Friends, it has been our joy and our delight to be with you this afternoon. Some 4 final thoughts. Read for yourself, love boldly, question everything, and by God's great grace, trust your own experience. May God's grace go with you today. May God's face shine on you gloriously and look upon you with favor and bring you peace. Peace and blessings, friends. Be well.